All right, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of freedom. Guys, I think you're going to enjoy my guest today. His name is Scott Phelps. He is the president of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. And I'll tell you why it is important and why this subject is so important. Right now, the left is trying to undermine Christianity. They're demonizing Christians. They're using the term Christian nationalism. They're trying to indoctrinate our children in schools, and frankly, there's got to be an opposition movement. And I do believe that the church is called to be salt and light in the culture. And if the church is not involved in the culture, then we lose the culture, as evidenced by a new survey that just came out that we will get to briefly. But I do believe that the evangelical church had an opportunity to fight back against the racism of the BLM movement. I do believe that the church had an opportunity to fight back against the tyranny of the COVID lockdowns. I do believe the church has an obligation and a duty to fight back of the over-sexualization of our children and the transing and the mutilation of children that is going on and becoming prevalent and normalized in our society today. So that's why we have Scott Phelps on. Again, he's the president of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Scott, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show, man. Honor to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me, Carl. Really, really appreciate you. Appreciate your show, all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Now, listen, why is this issue of abstinence so important to you? Because a lot of people will listen to that title or listen to or hear the name of your organization, and they'll be like, "Oh man, he's just an old fuddy-duddy." But the left is using the sexualization of our children to advance their agenda in the culture. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And so when I named our organization the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership, I looked for the least politically correct terms possible. I'm only saying that in jest, but I'll be honest with you, Carl. I believe the power of our message is in its distinctiveness. We are not a sex education program. We exist to contradict sex education. We think sex education is corrosive to the national soul. It's killing our kids. And what we need to do, what we're all about then, is offering solutions. It's not enough for us to stand in front of a school with signs saying, stop transing the kids, stop giving them condoms, stop putting them on the pill, stop. I'm not against that. Good for you if you're doing that. Thank you. We need that. But on the other hand, who's going to provide solutions for the schools? What we want to do is go to schools and say, look, what you're doing is harmful to our youth. Here's a much better, holistic, wholesome way to approach the subject. And in terms of absence being an old-fashioned term, you know what, Carl? It's so old-fashioned, it's extinct. Let me tell you how a girl at a Chicago public school responded some years ago when we were teaching the abstinence until marriage message. After the program, this girl in a Chicago public school said to me this. She said, "Actually, I think saving sex for marriage is a great idea. I never thought of that before. That's what I want to do." Ding, 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 ding. You see, this girl represents a generation of young people who haven't rejected the abstinence message. They've never heard it. And we think the absence message is absolutely fundamental and critical because what it means is you are resisting sexual pressure. You are learning self-discipline, respect, responsibility, self-control, and you are preparing yourself to enter into a future, happy, healthy marriage. And marriage is the cornerstone of culture. If we're going to restore the institution of marriage in America today, it's got to start by helping our young people appreciate the value of marriage and why sexual activity is best reserved for the context of a marriage relationship. And if we can do that for a new generation of American youth, that is our hope for tomorrow. We have the slogan, restoring the dream for America's youth. We want to help rescue them from a corrosive culture and give them hope for the future. And that's what we're all about.
All right, and this is so important. Let me, for a couple of reasons. Your message is so important, and your ministry is so important for a couple of reasons. And for those of you that are more politically inclined, I think that this will, appeal to you. First off, I would say this: that the youth really do want to be a part of something meaningful and purposeful.
Yes.
And so when they get involved in organizations like this, or when they start learning different ways to go about life other than what the world is teaching them, other than what secular society is teaching them, they truly want to be a part of something. You see that, sadly, in the political movement. You don't necessarily see it, in my opinion, as much in the church. And I think it's because the church has oftentimes acquiesced to the culture instead of being salt and light for the culture. Also, I was just reading a book, or through a book, Scott, by Erwin Lutzer. I'm sure you know who Erwin Lutzer is. And he's written a book called "We Will Not Be Silenced." I would encourage everybody to read this book. It is fabulous, especially for Christians that want to be involved in the cultural fights and understanding how the left is using cultural issues to undermine to undermine the church, to undermine God's kingdom. And one of the things that he talks about specifically, Scott, is the issue of marriage. And people may not know this, but Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were adamantly opposed to marriage. And obviously, you guys know who Karl Marx is, obviously the founder of Marxism. All right. And so socialism, basically, and they were adamantly opposed to marriage. They were adamantly opposed to the nuclear family. It's so ironic that the Black Lives Matter movement took up this mantra, and you saw church people, for God's sakes, falling for that sinful nonsense. You should be ashamed of yourself and repent for that. That's just me going off on a tangent there, Scott. All right. But in this book, what Lutzer, and I knew this, but he made it clear and explained it so well. What Karl Marx attempted to do, and Friedrich Engels, is they had such a hatred for marriage because they believed that what marriage did was give an advantage to families. In other words, they believed that marriage gave an advantage to the children. The parents could leave their wealth behind, they could leave their property behind. And they said, well, what about for the children that are growing up poor?
Yes.
The only way that we can compete with that is to undermine marriage, destroy marriage, and then redistribute property and wealth so that everybody gets a piece of it. And also, they wanted to undermine God because they believed God was an opiate, if you will, for weak people.
Yes.
All right, your take, Scott. That was a long. Anyway, this is your
no,
interview,
you're
not mine.
you're absolutely correct in all of that. That the state can't control the children if the family is in the way. So we've got to get rid of the family so that we can control the children. There's no question about that, and you're seeing that increasingly in our culture. Erwin Lutzer is terrific. I encourage your listeners to read everything they can. He's a good friend and supporter of our work. I was just with him the other night. His book, We Will Not Be Silenced, is terrific. His sequel to that is No Reason to Hide. And that is also very good. He's got a new one coming out, The Eclipse of God. And I appreciate Erwin Lutzer very much. And this past year, we honored him at our annual banquet because what Erwin Lutzer does so well is he is a model for the evangelical church. He is faithful to the word, and then he addresses the issues in culture in a clear and compelling way. How should the church respond to these things? What is our role? And as I have indicated, our role, I believe, is to provide the solutions. What it means to be salt and light is to be in the culture. And of course, we like to say it's okay for the boat to be in the water as long as the water isn't in the boat, right? So we need to be in the culture, in the boat, and we need to be lifting up solutions for our young people. It's not enough to, what is this saying? It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness, right? And so it's not enough for the church to speak out against the harm that's being done to our young people. We've got to light a candle. We've got to provide a solution. We have to show them the way out. Here's the way out of the darkness. Here's the way out of the tunnel. And that's what we're all about. We want to lift up what is good and wholesome and healthy, and we want to restore the dream for America's youth. We want to give them hope for the future. And we believe that marriage, listen, I was just doing research this morning that I'm working on a blog post or an article for another organization they've asked me to write, where the University of Michigan has done substantive research for decades now. And what their research shows is that 9 in 10 high school seniors, 90% of high school seniors nationally say, I want to get married, I want to have a family, I want it to go well.
Hmm.
Who's helping them? Who's teaching them? Who's guiding them? Who's giving them any sense of encouragement that you can have? That's what we're all about. What we want to say to young people is, hey, listen. We understand that there is this desire in your heart for marriage and family, but you don't see any encouragement toward that especially in your schools. And what we want to do is provide that for you. Marriage and family are good and worthy goals. And I've got a lot more I can say about that, but that's our goal, Carl, is to go into the darkness with a very bright light. And the kids are attracted to that very much so.
Man, that's such a good message. We only have 20 seconds before the break. Again, I'm speaking to Scott Phelps. He is the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. He'll be back to talk about this more. We're going to deal with some specific issues, including 8 in 10 Americans say religion is losing its influence in public life. We want to address that. We'll be back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Scott Phelps, the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Before we go forward, I just want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by MyPillow.com. Mike Lindell has a passion to help get you the best sleep of your life. After he invented the world's best pillow, he created the famous Giza Dream Sheets. They are the best sheets that you'll ever sleep on. So for a limited time, you can get the queen size sheets for $59.98. The king size sheets are just $10 more. These are the lowest prices in history. Mike and My Pillow continue to be canceled by the big box stores, so you can fight back with Mike. All right, and all you have to do to show your appreciation is go to mypillow.com and order today. All right, Mike is a fighter in the movement for religious freedom, for political freedom as well. To get these specials, all you have to do is go to mypillow.com or call 800-858-0263 and use the promo code Carl, C-A-R-L. All right, I don't spell it like Karl Marx. All right, now let's get back to my guest here. My guest again is Scott Phelps. He is the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. And we're talking about, you hear this issue of abstinence and marriage. And some parents, I think, Scott, are sometimes even scared to take this idea on. Maybe I'm off base with their kids, but your kids will be better for it. Your kids will be able to decipher better relationships. And I think this goes beyond future intimate relationships with a spouse. I just think they learn control, they learn discipline, they learn the right types of people to be around and congregate with. What say you, Scott?
Yes, no, you're exactly right. Everything that we're teaching them now are skills that are going to benefit them now as well as in a future marriage relationship. So the habits and patterns that they are developing as teenagers are going to be to their benefit in the future as well. And so we want to help them think forward and how they can develop these principles. One of the things that we try to help them have some sense of perspective about is, what kind of a person do I want to be? How are the decisions that I'm making now going to affect me now and in the future in terms of a future relationship? Look, I think there's a lot of misperception among our young people about marriage, that marriage doesn't work, marriages fail, marriage is painful, marriage is hurtful, marriage doesn't work. And they have the perception, it's not an exact statistic, but they have the perception anyway that half of all marriages end in divorce. It's not quite exactly accurate, but that's the perception nevertheless. So in other words, their perspective, right or wrong, is that it's a 50-50 proposition. It's a flip of a coin, right? I'm a little bit nervous about getting married because it's kind of like a flip of a coin whether or not it will work. And what I want to help them understand is it's not like that. It's not random. It's not a random 50% option. Isn't it true? I'll say it to them just like this. Isn't it true that some students study really well for the exam and they ace the exam? And isn't it true that some students blow it off and go out partying and drinking and don't study for the exam and they fail the exam? Marriage is the same way. You can prepare for it well, or you can totally blow it off. And what we want to help them understand is that learning self-control now, resisting sexual pressure now, resisting other risk behaviors, like drugs and alcohol as well, are things that are going to prepare you to be a faithful, husband, a faithful wife, a faithful father, a faithful mother. We're teaching you now principles that are going to benefit you both now and in the future. And so, again, it's a very positive, it's an uplifting, it's an encouraging message, and it is preparing them well. We actually teach what's called the success sequence. I'm sure you've heard of the success sequence. We call our 4-part curriculum series for schools, and most of our work is done in public schools around the country, and we call it the Success Sequence Program. And what researchers have identified at all the big think tanks, Heritage, Brookings, American Enterprise Institute, and so forth, Institute for Family Studies, the success sequence is very simply this: if we can help our young people get an education, get a job, and then marry
Yep.
prior to having
Yep.
children, they're very likely to do well in life. They're not going to be dependent on their parents or the government, a welfare check, food stamps, anything like that. And so everything that we're teaching them is preparing them to be healthy, productive citizens. And so it's solutions based, it's positive, it's healthy. It is the exact opposite of what sex education is doing to our kids. And so we exist to replace what's taught in sex education class with good, healthy, wholesome messaging on the benefits of abstinence now
Right.
and preparation for marriage in the future. We think that's absolutely critical for our nation at this
Yeah, and
time.
I totally agree with you. Even the Brookings Institute were part of that study or came out with the same study. All that you have to do is graduate high school, get a job, get married, and then have kids. And I believe the percentile is somewhere in the 90% range that you're
Yes.
going to easily be a part of the middle class and you're going to be able to avoid poverty. So this stuff works. And consider this when it comes to the revolution and all of that kind of stuff. Parents, for those of you that are listening, all of this, I mean, obviously it plays out spiritually, right, for those of us that are our believers, but also in the political realm, you have to understand that what the communists, what the Marxists use, they use things like sex in order to bring your kids in and indoctrinate them into their agenda. It isn't about sex alone. It's about getting your children to abandon the God of the Bible and to abandon our Judeo-Christian principles, even that this country was founded on. So make no mistake about it. You're in a spiritual fight, and oftentimes you're in a political fight. We only have about 4 minutes left, Scott. What I want to do, and again, I'm speaking with my guest, Scott Phelps, of the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. I want to just bullet point some things real quick and have you knock them out, get your response to them. This report or survey I saw in Breitbart, 8 in 10 Americans say religion is losing its influence in public life. I want to get a quick response to this. Um, Scott, it is my belief that Christians should be involved in the public square. Otherwise, we lose the culture, and God forbid, we lose some people to hell. That's the way that I look at this. When I believe the evangelical church missed some golden opportunities when it came to the tyrannical COVID lockdowns, when it came to the racist BLM movement, the Marxists in that movement. I mean, what a great name. Black Lives Matter. So you get a lot of people that are sympathetic and empathetic to the cause, even amongst evangelical churches. And they're like, hey, yeah, we should be a part of this, all the while not knowing what these organizations are really about. And then I look at the mutilization of our children. And this is something that we have to stand up for, the transing of our kids. And it starts with sexualizing our kids at a very young age. Scott, your response?
I couldn't agree more. You've said it very well. And look, I have to own my part in this. I believe that the church has been intimidated into silence on many of these issues because you don't want to be called a hater. You don't want to be called a bigot. You don't want to be called intolerant. You just want to be a loving person. And so, you Christians, if you really love people, you won't speak out about these things. And I think many of us, and again, I'm going to own my own part in this, we have been intimidated into addressing these things honestly and clearly for fear of offense. And we don't want to offend anybody. We don't make anybody feel bad. And so we tend not to speak out on the things that we ought to speak out on. And so, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the church needs to stand up and speak out in love. Look, I think truth and love must necessarily go hand in hand. You can't just speak the truth. You can't just speak the love. You have to speak the truth in love, right? And I think that when you do that, I think that's exactly the remedy, the solution that the church needs. stand up, speak out truthfully, and lovingly. That's what we have to do.
All right, Scott, let me, we only have just over a minute left. Let me bring your attention to a particular subject here. Sex ed, this is in Brown. This is at Brown University, I believe. Here's the headline. Sex ed by Brown Med empowers teens in Central Falls to take charge of their health and futures. Spearheaded by a team of Brown medical students, the sex education program at Calcut Middle School is equipping kids with skills to navigate sexual health and personal relationships with confidence and responsibility. I got to be honest with you, Scott. That sounds really creepy to me. I don't want adults. I don't care. I don't care if they call themselves students teaching my kids about, or our kids about sex. First off, I'm concerned that some of these people will be perverts and make advances towards children. But this is some of the stuff that you deal with. We have just shy of a minute.
Oh my goodness, give me a minute for this one, Carl. This is the whole enchilada right here. Because what you're describing is happening right now all across America, right? And we believe, as I said at the top of the show, we believe sex education is corrosive to the national soul. It's doing great harm to our kids, as you've just described. Imagine that happening in schools across America, because it is. And I think most parents are unaware largely of what is happening in our schools to our kids. There's a great podcast or a webinar I encourage your listeners to check out from Heritage Foundation called Protecting Our Kids. It's 3 moms talking about what happened to their daughters in the public schools. One, I think, is from Rhode Island. One is from Florida. One is from California. It'd break your heart. Just absolutely break your heart. These moms talking about what happened to their daughters, Scott, in schools through sex ed.
Tell you what, hold it there. We'll bring them back for a few minutes. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Carl Jackson Show. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Our guest was on such a roll, we decided to have him back for part of another segment. But I do believe that these issues are so important, because I do believe these cultural issues that are so important both to the church, and I believe also to the culture as a whole. We have to talk about them. We have to address them. And again, I'm speaking to Scott Phelps. He is the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Now, Scott, before we went to break, you were talking about a program that exists at Heritage Foundation. And fortunately, I cut you off with time. But why don't you go ahead and elaborate on that? And also the headline that we talked about briefly, that's associated with Brown University, apparently.
Yes. So the Heritage Foundation did a webinar, I want to say over a year ago, but it's on their website, I believe, still, called Protecting Our Kids. And it was a panel. They had 3 mothers. I believe it was one from Rhode Island, one from Florida, and one from California. And each of them told of their experiences of what happened to their daughters. I think in each case it was a daughter, through the sex education program at their local public school. And in each case, it's heart-wrenching. The third one, the California mother, I wept. I've watched this a couple of times. I can't watch it without weeping. And I say to myself, how is this happening in America? How is this possibly happening? And so when I say sex education is doing great harm, I mean that quite literally. And that, again, that the solution, the response isn't just to say, this is really bad, stop it. Look, you can't just say stop. You've got to replace with the good. And so, again, our goal is to lift up the healthy message of abstinence until marriage as a healthy solution for kids. Look, we are not a sex education program. We believe, just as you were saying with this Brown situation, we believe that it is inappropriate and unnecessary and improper for schools to be teaching a whole range of sexual topics with our kids. At Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership, we carry no burden to discuss all things sexual. That's not our mission. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is we have a narrow, limited scope. We believe that it's a responsibility of an educational facility, of a school, to clearly and plainly explain to our young people the benefits of reserving all sexual activity for the context of marriage. We should not be indoctrinating them into sexual deviancy, which is what is happening in our schools today. And listen, it's not enough, Carl, for a parent to go to the school and say, hey, do you guys teach abstinence? I don't believe, Carl, I don't believe there's a school in America that will say we don't teach abstinence, if you know what I mean.
Right.
It's a fig leaf. Everyone will say that they teach abstinence, knowing that means wholesome, good education, but it's used only as a fig leaf. Let me give you an example. Here's something I share in my teacher training seminars that I pulled down from Google at the University of Alberta Health Center, but it's a typical sort of sex education definition of abstinence. Okay, listen to what it says. Abstinence doesn't have to mean shutting off your sexuality. In fact, with a little imagination, abstinence can be a very sexy, satisfying choice if that's what you want it to be. It might include holding hands, flirting, feeding each other, gazing in your partner's eyes, massage, sharing fantasies, bathing together, necking, self-pleasuring, touching your partner's body, oral sex, strolling arm in arm. There are a million possibilities. Now, this is a typical sex education definition of abstinence. So if you say to your school, hey, you guys teaching abstinence? Sure, we teach abstinence.
Wow.
Okay, but what do you mean? And so this is why it's really important to understand what your school is teaching. What we want to make sure that we're teaching is abstinence until marriage. I was on a show out in LA a couple of years ago called The Doctors, and I was debating a sex ed lady. And I said to her, look, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know of a single sex education program in America. Think about this for a minute. I don't know of a single sex education program in America that will even give kids the opportunity to save sex for marriage, abstinence until marriage. It's not a part of what is taught in any single sex education program anywhere in the country. You know what she said? Yeah, you're right. We don't teach that. So sex education will say, oh yeah, we do, contraception, but we also include abstinence. Well, this is what they mean by abstinence. Yeah. You see what I mean? They've corrupted the terminology and used it as a fig leaf to cover what they really want to do. And it's really, really harmful for our young.
And this is a good lesson. We only have about 30 seconds left here. This has flown by, but you have to understand language matters when it comes to the left. You're absolutely right. Again, I'm speaking with Scott Phelps. He's the founder of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Scott, in this short time that we have remaining, but less than 25 seconds here, tell people the best place they can go to find out about your organization.
Yes, thank you. ampartnership.org. ampartnership.org is our website. And if they want specifically curriculum for their schools or for their home use, they can go to successsequence.com. Successsequence.com is where we have our curriculum available for you, for your church, for your school, or for use.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us, Scott.